Okay, board members, I appreciate you coming back quickly from the lunch break. We'll dive right back into our item, our agenda. We were on 6.2, where Deputy Superintendent Jones had our discretionary funds reports up, and we were moving on to the 6.2.1 discussion item, possible action.
Yes, sir. This is Scott back again. So if we could pull up the proposed motion at your direction, Chair, is that okay?
Yes, some background on this is within our policy, if two or more board members want to have an item put on the agenda, that they can invite that, and then the chair can put that either in a committee or in a board meeting. And it was put on our agenda here today. And is board member Scott Hansen, you still with us?
I am here, Chair. Thanks.
You were one of the board members that wanted to bring this forth, and you helped craft a motion. Are you prepared to make a motion?
Sure. And then I'll speak to that if you'll allow me to. Yeah. But the motion is that the $54,155.55 of FML funds in excess of position requirements be returned to the discretionary account for future allocation by the board. If I could, there's a second, I'll speak to that.
Okay, good. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second. This is board member. Second.
Okay. Well, that was like in harmony. So we'll give that to board member Earl. Board member Hansen, want to speak to your motion?
Certainly, and I'll make more motions if I can get those two board members to sing together. That's great. The board had a discussion at the time that we approved a position for a temporary USB director, a director of equity. And at the time of the discussion, it was very clear, and at least for me, going back and reviewing our discussion, we asked about the amount that was required for that position. $180,000 was the figure that was given. But the wording of the motion swept the remaining balance of the funds and allocated those to the position, which resulted in about $54,000 in excess of the 180 being allocated to that position. So the reason for the motion today is just to bring that allocation back to, I think, what most, if not all, of the board members thought we were doing at the time we made the motion. So it's to correct that misunderstanding. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any other discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. So the motion that's placed before the board is that $54,155.55 of the FML funds in excess of position requirements be returned to the discretionary account for future allocation by the board. Board members, at this time, please vote. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with the checks. I'm hoping I don't have to do a roll call vote, but we'll see how this plays out. Okay, board member Cannon, not seeing. Board member Hymas. So the motion passes. I'm just seeing if it's going to be unanimous. So board member Cannon, I'm going to call out your vote. Are you a yes or a no?
I am a yes, and I've put it up twice. And I'm trying to use my little thing that says slower, thinking maybe that would leave it up there longer because it keeps disappearing. But yeah, I'm a yes.
Okay. The way that I'm seeing this, Vice Chair Belknap, the motion passes unanimously.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Huntsman, point of order.
Yes.
There's also, we have the ability to do an up thumb and a down thumb, if that would help us at all. It's under the More tab over to the right. You could do an up thumb or a down thumb. I realize it doesn't denote color, but we could try that if it will.
Let's just do a quick test here. If everyone will turn their checks off. And Board Member Lear, if you can lower your hand. Okay, and if we go to the More.
I can't see the More.
Okay, well, you can use your hand, but let's you guys give it a thumbs up.
I got a thumbs up, but I don't have a thumbs down.
All right, so we'll work with you.
Carol Lear?
Yes.
I think it's under where the participants are, not under the reactions. Are you reactions?
I see.
Yeah, because I did the same thing, so.
Thank you, ma'am.
So it appears.
No, let me try. No, I don't seem to get it under participants either. I'll somehow let you know.
We'll figure it out.
I thought Molly's idea of thumbs up, green check, clapping, that did the trick.
Okay. Well, we'll
vote no. Can't vote no that way, but oh well.
Chair, this is Jerry. There is another option that I've just learned about. I could put this up.
Oh, I like that.
That seems very efficient.
That is, let's clear let's see if it works.
Okay.
Okay, Board Member Lear, your hand's still raised, and Board Member Moss, your thumb is up. So I just checked the yes. Will that show up on my screen as a, how do we inventory that? Jerry?
We're not able to see those results. I guess maybe the host can see those, but.
Yes, the host can see them. I'm sure that as soon as the poll closes, it will show for all of you, but.
There it goes and comes back, but it doesn't give us the individual votes. It just shows yes and no percentages.
Let's just try to get through our day with the way that we were doing it with our checks and hands. And if somebody can't get it, I'll call them out for their vote. It's a lot quicker than doing the roll call that we were doing a long time ago. Okay, well, let's continue. Everyone's got their hands and checks off. So Board Member Lear, your hand's still up. Did you have something you wanted to add, or will your hand not come down? Oh, we're good. All right. Well, we're back in 8.2. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Yes, sir. Hang on a second. I apologize. I think there's an Amber Alert going out. Okay, I'm good. Yes, sir. If we segue to 8.2, what this is 8.2 is a iterative process of the staff and staff providing input to the board and recommendations on funding requests. We're inclusive of all of our stakeholders, if you will, LEAs, all of the different entities. What we're going to do is provide, especially where we have new board members coming in at this time, this iterative process really starts right pretty much at the beginning of the fiscal year, the July-August timeframe. And what the process is the determination of the board's request for funding within the next legislative session. It's iterative, it's develops. What we do is it's tailored to follow the Budgetary Procedures Act. The Budgetary Procedures Act requires that that public education, the board provides recommendations to the governor. That's mandated in the law, in the act. And that typically occurs around the October timeframe. Obviously, this year has been much different with the impacts of COVID on all sorts of our different processes. At first, the governor's office had declared that, they didn't necessarily want additional funding requests due to concerns with revenue. That's fine. We understood that. Then after the October board meeting, it became clear that there might be some opportunities with revenue. And so the governor did ask, or governor staff asked for some additional input, which we followed that process in the November meeting. We turned, at that point, what the board had recommended over to the governor's office. We'll walk you through that a little bit more here in a few minutes. So that the December meeting, when we arrived at the December meeting, the board, and, at the same time, parallel to this was, of course, the voting on Amendment G that took place on November 3rd. Then, of course, the bills that were passed in the special session, which we'll get to here in a minute as well. So what has occurred from the last board meeting from December, but from your December board meeting to this board meeting, which was a very important event. It was the meeting of the Executive Appropriations Committee at the Utah Legislature. It is there that revenue has become even more clear. Typically, we land on exactly what revenue is available for public education in roughly about the first or second week in February. That's where everything comes together. It's solidified, and we move forward with what additional funding is available. There is a draft of the base budget bill out. I'm sure Dell will talk a little bit about that. So at this point, Chair, if I could orient the board members, if we could go back out, because I'm still seeing the action item on maybe it's my screen, I don't know. But yeah, if we could go back out though, I do want to orient the board members to the sub-agenda item, which really provides all the backup documentation of what occurred in the Executive Appropriations Committee. It's here that we would like board members, even after this meeting, if you'll take really a closer look at this, and if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact myself, Deborah Jacobson, Patrick Lee, or Dell Frost. We'll answer any questions or concerns you might have about these reports that, again, came out of Executive Appropriations Committee on what the revenue position is at this time. As we get into more details about the actions that occurred from Executive Appropriations Committee, if the driver of this will just scroll down a little bit further stay on this chart, right? So after all of the Executive Appropriations Committee actions took place, which again had a lot to do with the fact that Amendment G passed, there's a House Bill 357. Again, we'll show you the details on what amounts to a tool we use, which is called our budget tracker. Dell Frost is going to walk you through a little bit more on the details on that. So where we ended up with is this report that there's, it was over $1 billion in one-time funds and $87 million of ongoing funds. Well, within that $1 billion of one-time funds, we're tracking at this point about $390 million that are in the education fund. And however, that $390 million is accessible by us, by public ed, by higher ed, and also now, due to the changes with Amendment G, departments, if you will, or entities that represent individuals with disabilities. So again, as we dive deeper into this process to keep you very informed about, consideration of revenue and the programs and process that you've already prioritized, we just want to make sure that we're very transparent and clear on where things are at with revenue. That $87 million that you see on the right there of ongoing funds is between the general fund and the education fund, is our understanding. And, if I'm missing anything here, Dell can clarify a little bit later here when I turn it over to him. The piece to that too is we work very closely. We have a great relationship, collaborative relationship with staff from the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office and then also with GOMB. So we're all tracking this. We're all working together so that when the legislative session starts, when that gavel drops, we're all in tune with what you as the board has determined is what you would like to see or go forward as far as your request for what amounts to additional or available new revenue or new money. That $87 million, I don't quite have the detail of how much of that $87 million or 87 million of ongoing funding is available to public education at this point. There's been more details provided on one-time money to this point, so I just wanted to articulate that. So with that, Chair, again, I won't go into any of the other reports. I just felt it really beneficial to us all, to facilitate this process of, considering or arriving at this point where you all would like to proceed with your request for use of funding. Again, take a look at the other reports that are in there. And, we're always open for questions from any board members on any time about any of these numbers, where they come from or anything like that. So
Deputy Superintendent Jones, can you speak, because we have a lot of new board members here, these numbers come forward, and so there's opportunities to act. And when are those opportunities moving forward? And there's a sense in just how we present and assumptions and that we have to act today. And there's also a sense sometimes when we give these numbers that, and you've put the disclaimer in there a couple times, but because the number's up there, it's almost like, oh, we've got $87 million to work with. And so there's a reality. And so with these board members, just to kind of help them out is, and I don't want to take the whole conversation, but there's a process as we move forward, as we work with the legislature to really see what's available. And we also listen to them too, to see what they think their priorities, the governors and et cetera. And when we align a certain way, we don't have to be perfectly aligned, then good things seem to come. But so can you talk about the time, a little bit of process and just high level and the timeline that's up in front of us again?
Sure.
Before, but
yeah, I can't emphasize enough the term that this is an iterative process. It's something that evolves over time and really leading up to the beginning of the session and throughout the session as well. What we do try to do, though, is, and so in the 5 years I've been here, and I'm sure Superintendent Dixon can attest to this too, is that the public education appropriations chairs have typically said, okay, first or second week roughly, or maybe the second meeting of PEA, they ask, where is the board at as far as, requests for funding, right? For, additional money beyond what's been put into the base budget, right? So, and this is especially different this year because of the impacts of COVID and a lot of the things that the superintendent teed up by way of her report related to, concerns or considerations of learning losses, and, a lot of input that we've been getting from, our great partners in the legislature, our great partners in the governor's office about, given, where we're at right now with revenue, where is the board at as far as, what would be most impactful and most helpful and most resourceful to the LEAs. It doesn't mean that if you say, this is our priority today, that prioritization can't change, right? As we get more information on available revenue or, more data and details, from Jennifer and her team, that, you always have that opportunity, which is another reason why, during the session, we ask the board the board does meet weekly, every Thursday. And so that iterative process even takes on another frequency level, right? Because you're meeting weekly and we can make whatever adjustments that you as the board see fit. And that ultimately, and this has taken place every year I've been here, is always in the best interest of putting the most resources into our most precious resources, which are our educators and our students. So it's a pretty good proven process. Not perfect, but it's iterative. Did I answer your question, Chair Huntsman? I know I tend to.
Yes. And
Just
Board Member
speak.
Cannon has her hand raised, so thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to get that prelude before you turn it over to Mr. Frost. So, Board Member Cannon?
Thank you. Scott, I am wondering if you could just give us an estimate. We had kind of a banner year for education last year at the legislature. Then COVID hit and all new funding was taken away. So now we find ourselves in a position where a lot of the requests are to restore the funding that was taken away. As you look at funding estimates, what possibilities do you see of the funding that was allotted last year being able to be restored during this session?
Yeah. Okay. Great. Great question. And I'm ready. Adele and I are ready to answer that. So could we segue into the main portion of the agenda item, bring the tracker up and show you what's been appropriated now, where we see opportunities for funding? I think that's what you're asking, Board Member Cannon. Can we proceed that way? And then I'll check back with you and make sure that we answered your question. Will that work, ma'am?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So, Chair, if it's okay at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Del Frost for him to basically catch us up on what was done between your last meeting in December and now, right? Reorient you all to what the board in December had prioritized to that point, and then go ahead with the recommendations based on, again, what input we're getting from the field, things related to learning losses and, maybe closing learning gaps out there. I've heard that term before too. So Chair, is it okay if I turn over to Dell just to quickly walk through, give us a summary of where we've been? Okay, Dell, you ready?
I'm ready. Scott, Chair, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Dale Frost, Fiscal Policy Analyst for the board. It's a pleasure to talk to you today. A couple of the pieces of information that I wanted to reiterate that Scott said was that the opportunities for funding increases this year are really in the one-time space. And we had a historic EAC session, that's the Executive Appropriations Committee session, where more money ongoing was appropriated to education than ever before in the base budget. I'm going to go over that. And that's primarily due to Constitutional Amendment G and their tied statutory requirements. But the Executive Appropriations Committee went well above and beyond what was required by those statutes. So I'll go into that in a little more detail. So in this first table you have here, thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings, I think you're controlling, is that correct? That if you see this first line here, items approved for the base budget. So the EAC appropriated a little more than $400 million into the base budget. These three columns are a little confusing in this first piece, and I'll go show you why, but it's because of a new restricted account called the Public Education Economic Stabilization Restricted Account. And that is meant to help the state weather hard budget times in future years. So it actually moves some of the funds from one time to ongoing, and it looks higher than it actually is. But the $400 million is accurate there, and I'll go through all those pieces. And then you'll see that the top priority business cases, that amount is significantly higher because there's $260 million that we're recommending in one-time funds be allocated to address these learning loss issues that have been articulated by the superintendent, by Director Thronson, and others. So I'll quickly go through what was included in the base budget, and I will be happy to answer questions after or throughout. Just let me know, Chair Huntsman. So if we can scroll down a little bit.
Hey, Dale, yes. Hang on with that. So you're going to tell us where we're at and then tell us what the opportunity is before us, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let me see what Vice Chair Davis, did you have a question before Dale continues?
I just had a question about what was included in the base budget, and I can ask that later if you would.
Okay, I saw your hand raised, so.
There was one piece that was missing that I thought was legislatively appropriated. I wanted to double check.
Okay, Dell, why don't you proceed where we're at and then what the opportunity is before us. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And let me know if I don't answer the base budget question that you have, Vice Chair Davis. So the first piece here is the most consequential, I would argue, which is an increase in the WPU value. If you remember, the WPU value last year was increased by 6%, and that was rescinded. And then in the summer, the legislature increased the WPU value by 1.8%. What they did in the EAC meeting was to further increase the WPU value by almost 6%, 5.92%, to about from 3,596 to 3,809. And so that's actually a higher level than what came out of the 2020 general session. And these are flexible funds used and allocated to all LEAs based on enrollments and ADM. And I wanted to point out that 89 million of this $200 million, 203 million that was provided was actually discretionary increases above and beyond what was required in Constitutional Amendment G. So that's the first piece. The next piece is funding enrollment growth. So these are new students in new programs. Some of this is contingency funds for in case we have enrollment growth above and beyond what we projected through the Common Data Committee process. So if you can scroll down, so that's about 33 million if you include one time. Additionally, there are hold harmless provisions in statute that requires if students move around the system in certain ways, it actually costs more for the system. It holds harmless certain LEAs and then provides that growth funding to other LEAs. And so they included 43 million over the next 2 years, 21.5 million to help pay for those things. And then the next piece is the Public Education Economic Stabilization Restricted Account. They allocate 127 million ongoing and reduce that one time. And what this will do over time is create ongoing capacity so that when there are years without available ongoing revenues, that this stabilization account can fund things such as the required WPU value increase and enrollment growth that's now part of Constitutional Amendment G. So the next inclusion was $121 million to provide COVID stipends to educators and support staff within LEAs, and that was discretionary as well. And then there was a small increase to support the administrative costs for the statewide online education program. So those were the increases for public education that were included in that are going to be included in the base budget that were approved by EAC. So I do want to check, Vice Chair Davis, did I not answer your question?
Vice Chair Davis?
I thought that in OHB 357 that there was a piece that included advanced placement and concurrent enrollment, that it would be funded automatically for growth and not just a limited budget. Did that get taken out somewhere along the way?
If I may answer that, Chair.
Yeah. Yes, Dale.
So in the 203 million, especially concurrent enrollment and enhanced or accelerated programming for students is included in that. I would have to go back and see because there was also a statutory change to talk about program growth rather than overall growth. And I'd have to go back and look at and see what happened on that front.
Chair, may I follow up?
Let's follow up.
If we could get that information, that would be helpful, because then it would help us to know if we need to make strides in that area or requests in that space to grow those programs for all students.
We definitely can follow up with that information. But both of those programs will receive an increase due to the WPU value increase. But we'll answer your additional questions. So that is the base.
Mr.
Yes.
Frost, I think Dr. Thronston might have a comment on that. Her hand was raised from staff. Jennifer? Sorry to interrupt you, Dale. But did you have an answer to that?
Yes, thank you. So,
and your mic's working good.
Yay. Dr. Jennifer Thorelson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Specifically for this one, the previous ask was a much larger growth ask in terms of the program is continuously outpacing the amount of money and the growth of the program. So prior legislation year, we asked to kind of grow the program to actually keep pace with the growth we already have and to be able to grow over time. At this time, as you all know, given the current fiscal restraints, that is no longer the ask and would just be kind of going with the previous status quo of just the growth to enrollment over time. But ultimately, in the long run, we would like to see that population continue to grow in funding as the population has definitely outpaced the funding.
Okay. Board Member Davis, did you have a follow-up for Jennifer or anything for your question? For Vice Chair Davis?
Yeah, I thought that the new scenario would be that it would be funded for growth, but Angie Stallings is trying to raise her hand, so maybe she has a thought on this as well.
Okay, well, sorry, Dale, we've got your presentation hung up here. So, Deputy Superintendent Stallings, do you have an answer to Vice Chair Davis's question?
Yes, thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. Just kind of a reminder, in general, there are quite a few programs with automatic statutory inflators included, including the one you just mentioned, Vice Chair Davis. Those inflation adjustments or those growth adjustments usually come in the second budget bill that comes at the end of the session. You may remember that last year was the first year that we saw enrollment growth, and that was at just enrollment growth only included in the base budget. And then this year we've had, you see a lot more included in the base budget that's really related to HB 357 and then the special session bill, I believe it was HB 6011. The other long-standing inflationary adjustments to programs like the one you mentioned will likely be included in the final budget bill that we'll see the last week of the session. And Deputy Superintendent Jones or Delka, correct me, but that's historically when that growth comes at the end of the session, not in the base budget.
And Chair, if I may add, there are two business cases already on the list in the pass-through programs lines that have to do with program enrollment growth for those programs. So this is enrollment growth above and beyond general enrollment growth and to help keep up the funding in those programs. And so hopefully that gets to Vice Chair Davis's questions. So can I now move on to the prioritized items that have already been prioritized by the board? And this again was in the December meeting.
Yeah.
So Angie, if you can scroll down. Great, thank you. So there are 6 priorities that were prioritized by the board in December, and I'll very briefly go over them. The superintendent in her presentation mentioned House Bill 114, and to expand upon that, an important portion of that is priority number 1, which is the early grades professional learning. That would provide professional learning strategies, coaches, development to early educators, and this is especially needed in times of COVID. So that's $5 million. The previous request was much larger, and this would be to restore what came out of the 2020 general session. The next priority, number 2, is the remaining request for OEK, the Optional Enhanced Kindergarten Program, that provides full-day kindergarten and other enhanced opportunities for students who show academic need. The legislature had appropriated almost $17.5 million in the base budget, and there's about $8 million needed to address the full need according to the KEEP assessments. And that's about 40% of kindergartners if parents choose to put their kids in these programs. And so that's the request at $8.6 million. Those are the only 2 ongoing requests in the prioritized column. And I will stress, and this might go to Member Cannon's question, you'll see that there are a lot of prioritizations that come after with one-time funds, and that is that $1 billion statewide, about $400 million of which we think is from the education fund. But there's very few limited funds on the ongoing side. Again, it was $87 million across the state, and that's not just education agencies, but that is all the general fund agencies and everything else. And so I would stress to board members that, especially on the ongoing side, we expect funds to be very limited, especially because so much ongoing funding has already been allocated towards education. Not saying it's impossible, but it will be limited. So number 3, the Intensive Services Pilot Program. There was a $3 million state program that was cut in the summer due to COVID, and this provided funding for the most expensive, high-needs special education students to LEAs on a reimbursement basis. And this would replace that with a pilot program with one-time funds that would look at better ways to provide a more equitable distribution of those funds. And so that's number 3. Number 4 is a key need that we know of right now in this COVID era, which is expanded access to broadband. If we could scroll down just a little bit, Angie. There is a current program right now funded through coronavirus relief funds to provide broadband hotspot emergency grants to LEAs. That runs out in 2021, this school year, and our request is to fund that through 2022 with largely one-time funds. And the last 2 are to provide supports and resources to specific populations of students that we know there are lots of needs. There is a program called the EARS program, the Enhancement for At-Risk Students program. And these are programs that are living in poverty or are at risk of academic failure, show high mobility, show limited English proficiency, are homeless or chronically absent. And we know these students have been particularly hard hit by the COVID pandemic. And number 5 would be to provide a one-time infusion of funds to provide increased supports for those students. And the final one was a new program to re-engage learners who are disconnected. We know that there are learners who have become disconnected. We know there are large learning loss issues. We didn't know the extent of one-time funds available. And so what we had imagined and proposed to the board last month was a fairly narrow program that would be a qualifying grant, a competitive or a reimbursement program grant to specifically provide services to target those disengaged students and the supports they need. So now if we can go down to the next. So staff is bringing to the board for consideration and prioritization 2 one-time requests. And the first one, we are recommending actually replace this number 6 priority because it would address those needs, but then also be much broader. So this would be a $60 million one-time request. And if you look at the EAC documents, the green document shows that there's $60 million in balances that can be utilized one time, at least in the education fund. And our thought process here is that there is clear evidence of learning loss, and we need to provide resources to LEAs right away to start to provide interventions and supports this school year. And so the thought process would be to get this passed and out as quickly as we can so that we can get those funds allocated to LEAs. It would be based on a proportional share of their WPUs, but then they would need to use those for interventions and supports to help students address issues related to academic needs for COVID-19. So the superintendent talked about the Ogden Summer Bridge program very briefly. I wanted to just mention that. That's a really good example, but it's not the only example. But we are studying that to kind of better determine whether these placeholder amounts of 60 and 200 are needed. But what Ogden did this last summer, they provided 5 different programs that fall under their Summer Bridge programs. The first was a literacy. They provided literacy grab and go packs for students K through 8. And for elementary kids, they also provided literacy camps and math boot camps. And this was during the summer. For high school students, they provided math summer learning, and they also provided credit recovery programs and broader online courses. And it seems to have made a big difference for the district. We're still analyzing that and digging into what we can learn to support LEAs statewide, because as the superintendent said, and that is a promising example, but other LEAs have really innovative and promising ideas to help their students. And so we don't want to make it too restrictive, but at the same time, we want to provide guardrails so that the students who need the supports get those in a timely manner. So that's the $60 million to be used this year, and it would replace priority number 6. So it would help in disengaged learners, but also broader learning loss issues across the system. And then the $200 million would be one-time utilized for next school year. And this would continue interventions and supports, which could be early summer through the year. But then also we envision utilizing part of this funding to support innovation, to help out with some of those issues where teachers are burnt out because of teaching under multiple modalities without the systems to support them, and to really support pilot work and innovation, so that if there is ever a time in the future where students have to go through anything like they've had this last year, that there wouldn't be the learning losses that we've seen. So those are some of the ideas. I know there's a lot more work to be done on these 2 business cases, but we wanted to get these ideas early to you, and we would finalize these business cases and bring them back to the board at the first legislative update meeting, I think on the 21st. And so I don't know if you have questions about those 2. And we also have staff who can really speak more to the uses of these funds and the benefits to students. So I'll start up there. Chair Huntsman, are there questions?
Yes, we have quite a few hands raised. Let's start with representative. I'm just been terrible. Let's go to Board Member Moss. I see that Moss, and I jumped to represent. I don't know why. I apologize. They must be related.
It's okay. I saw one of the translation of the commentary turn somebody into God. So, you're not the only one making promotions. Just 2 quick questions. One is, the bridge program at Ogden is terrific. I know my district, Wasatch, had a good Spanish language development bridge program. I know there are good things going on. I'm curious the extent to which we have knowledge. I know we're midstream here, and people are still swimming and trying to stay above water. But as you look at this, infusion of funding, to what extent do we know or need to know what's working? And beyond, kind of reference to Ogden, that's my first question. And the second one, somewhat related, is it seems like some of these programs might have some overlap. And I'm curious the extent to which these are going to be clarified for particular focus, and hopefully that has some relation to the first question, right? It's what's working, and is some of this support for students at risk, would that be duplicative of immediate response money? Would some of that be also addressed by broadband for those kids who have been literally disconnected in the virtual world and not being able to take advantage of online offerings? So it's impossible to hit those. And I'm sorry, Chair, I probably breached protocol.
That's a lot of questions. I'm trying to keep track of them. I think, Superintendent, are you ready to, did you want to respond first?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Thank you, Chair Huntsman. And thank you for the questions, Board Member Moss. I think they're really important questions. As we've discussed this on the backside of trying to put these numbers forward, we feel like there are some very distinct categories, and we agree with you that there needs to be both data-driven decision-making on the front end, but also metrics of how we'll continue to measure our efforts. And that's everything needs to truly be framed around that. We do have some data, as mentioned by Jennifer Thronson, Dr. Thronson, to let us know where our current status. We also have some data on interventions that have taken place, such as the Ogden scenario, and other districts and charters have scenarios that they've tried with interventions as well. So to your point, however, we're just leaning into this, and there are some things that people may want to try that are innovative, and maybe that's appropriate for pilot funding. But again, you'd have to wrap that in data about how will you measure the outcomes. So as we put this money forward, these are general business cases, general in the nature that we know a lot of that needs to be built in. This is also typical of the process, where we try to put as much information as possible. But when we're talking about large sums of money with a disbursement methodology out to the LEAs, we want to make sure that we connote that context matters, and that there are both unique circumstances and methodologies. So it's sort of a macro approach, but also this micro built in according to how people might use the money. So trying to capture the macro, to your point, in these various business cases. Could there be overlap? Maybe, but if there's targeted funds, for example, that are around broadband, then you could put guardrails around that. If there's something specific, though, to professional learning, then that's, as Dell outlined in House Bill 114, that's very specific. So I think this is one of those unique circumstances, as we've learned along the way, that if you make the gate too narrow, then it limits people's ability for discovery. But I think we need to continue to ask the questions that you're asking. They're important, and we need to build those things in as we lay out applications.
Did you have a follow-up, Board Member Moss?
No, thank you, Superintendent.
Okay.
And Chair, if I may add, some of the specific questions will be answered with the full business cases. But again, there are still things that we do not know, and we can't make the program so restrictive that we can't provide the services to students, because we know timeliness is very important too. And so there's a balance here, and we're trying to strike that and utilize the resources available is the thought process.
So Dell, isn't it fair to say also that the LEAs are weighing in on this too, that they don't want to be too restrictive, and they're looking at their own opportunities with their existing resources too, so they are still seeking flexibility, and so there's still a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
Okay. Board Member Hanson?
Thanks, and I'll be brief. It's kind of piggybacking on Board Member Moss's question, I guess. As far as strategy goes, do we, as a USB, feel like it's better to go after a big hit and maybe lump some of these together rather than breaking it down into small chunks? And how does that affect our ability to get a legislator on board to help push the legislation through? Are there some who are more willing to get behind, say, a broadband initiative rather than a big omnibus kind of a spend that would be more similar to a WPU kind of ask, where we're asking for funds for the LEAs to use for coronavirus in general, but not specifically giving them specific direction or guardrails? But just more a question about strategy rather than how we're going to break these down.
Chair, could we have Scott or Angie maybe answer that question, or the superintendent? Is that possible?
I'm just looking for a hand from either one of them that want to weigh in on the strategy. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you. So from a strategy perspective, I think this goes to the ability to balance, the balancing act, if you will, of ensuring that we maximize our effort to get as much resources as we can into the field and for the flexibility. So from my vantage point and from the input I've got, talking with some legislators, but mostly, staff to staff, is that, there's going to be a lot of support for us, for public education, for using one-time money to address these, titled learning losses. But, and, by a bigger ask, so to approach Board Member Hansen's question, to utilize what we know is the one-time funding, is that, we should, my recommendation is to, replace priority number 6 and then recommend for prioritization the $200 million so that it's more of a bigger thing. And then by way of the process of identifying where those losses are occurring and to what populations and in what areas of the state, it maximizes the flexibility for distribution of these large sum amounts to really get to what we call precision funding at that level that it's needed most. Because and Superintendent Dixon can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be an error for us to say that one place looks like another, right? To do it. This recommendation that you're seeing here in a global sense or a macro sense really will maximize the effort and the ability for us to respond for districts and charter schools in their local areas and their populations to have the flexibility they need to respond to their individual students at their levels. So my answer to Board Member Hansen is I would try to consolidate this as much as possible. Yes, add specificity to there, but make sure that we can provide as much flexibility to the LEAs as possible to do what they need to do at their level. So does that answer your question, sir?
A follow-up, Board Member Hansen?
Yeah, it helps. I appreciate it. I know there's no cut and dried, up or down answer on this. I just wondered if we had legislators who were willing to get behind the big ask, because I know it's been easier maybe in the past to have them hone in on something specific that they can say, yes, I'm for broadband or I'm for this or that. So
I think, sir, if I may, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
So I think you're still going to see some of that. But again, the input that I've been getting is, let's arrive at a number, or a request for funding, but then also provide as much flexibility, at the local level as possible to, respond or to do what's necessary. So I think it would be value added if we heard from Superintendent Dixon on this too, because I don't want to misrepresent anything.
Okay. Superintendent Dixon, do you want to add anything here before we move on?
I would be happy to, and I just want to commend Deputy Superintendent Jones. He did not misrepresent at all, but I do want to emphasize that delicate balance of trying to make sure that we give legislators answers that they're looking for. If I were in their shoes and in your shoes, I definitely want to know how the money is being spent and being targeted to make a difference. How will we know? What will the data look like? How will we determine that we're targeting the funding at the right things? Out in the field, I do believe they want flexibility, but also enough of a guardrail that they can work with colleagues, know how to target the funding. And I want to just add that I think where we'll have to get more information from the field will be essential in also determining how the federal funding will be used versus the state funding. We have a lot of one-time funding coming at us, and I think it gives us an opportunity as a staff to now reach out to the field again. We've done this in the past, and Sarah Young's done an amazing job of tracking this and reporting it back to you. But I do think that we need to perhaps this week, right after board meeting, quickly gather some more information to see the ideas that are out there in the field about how they might spend some of these funds. I think that's a question we will get asked, given that we've got this new influx of ESSER 2, plus these one-time funds that we're asking for. So we'll reach out to the field and get that additional data.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I know that this isn't business as usual this year. We've got a big problem, and legislators may be more willing to open up the wallet even without the specifics, but I'll be interested as well in seeing that business case fleshed out as we get more information.
All right. Vice Chair Belknap, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'll piggyback really fast on what Scott said. I don't think we can make any decisions today on this until this is, we have a full business case. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Lear?
I'm just wanting to make sure I'm hearing correctly because there's a lot of, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. Sorry.
Okay. I'm just wanting to make sure I am hearing and understanding correctly. We've talked about professional development. We've talked about LEA responses. And there are different forms of the same phrase. I'm just wanting to understand, and Scott Jones just spoke to this also. I'm just wanting to be sure that LEAs have maximum flexibility over how these funds are spent. I understand guardrails, but I also, and I think that's a bit of I think we're speaking out of both sides of our mouths sometimes. And I'm trying to understand if Granite District chooses a particular professional development path or source, or that it's not the state board's responsibility to redirect that or take the money away or even criticize it. And I hope we can pass that on to the legislature as the legislature extends local control, but then sometimes has penalties for the wrong kind of local control. So am I misunderstanding? I don't know if that's a question for Scott or for Sid, and you may feel like you're repeating yourself, but I feel like I'm getting a mixed message.
Dr. Dixon, Superintendent.
Thank you. I understand, Board Member Lear, how that feels like a mixed message. It sort of is, in that we hear mixed messages from the field as well. So I agree that what we hear is the ability to have flexibility, and Ogden looks very different than San Juan, than Paiute, than Summit, Charter, et cetera. So we all agree that flexibility is important. I think the guardrails are more categorical. In other words, they want to be clear what they can spend it on. If you look at the ESSER funds, for example, they come with the funds came to us accompanied by a letter from Secretary DeVos asking that we focus on keeping students in school safely. But when you dig into the regulations, they read a little more general or more specific rather in categories. I think the same is true for the legislature. They want to know some general categories about how these items are to be spent. So providing them a list of the possibilities that doesn't dictate this is how exactly you have to spend these state dollars, but here's some possibilities that our LEAs are talking about and the things that they think are important that will make a difference. So it's that delicate balance and dance of the very things that Board Member Moss spoke to earlier. You know, how will we know? How will they measure them? And that's something at the heels, I think, of the LEAs as they ask for the funding to meet their needs. How will they know that it's making a difference? I hope that helped.
Sort of. Just a brief follow-up, Chair, just to say it would be my desire that we can be as flexible as possible with LEAs and also defend that local control when that opportunity arises with the feds, with the legislature, because I very much agree that Salt Lake's decisions and needs are very different than Canyons or even Granite, even though their borders are contiguous. We still have different needs, and I feel like we give lip service to that local control, and sometimes the defense is wanting when that occasion occurs, and I strongly support that. Thank you.
Chair Huntsman, may I quickly follow up?
Yes, please.
I think with the ESSER funds, there's a great opportunity for a lot of local control as we send those out by formula to the LEAs. I think in terms of the state one-time money, local control is also important, but it's probably a different audience for our legislature to want some things in particular categories so that when we report back to them, we can report it categorically. I think that's, Scott, I hope I didn't misrepresent what you were saying, but that's definitely the message that we're getting from the Hill. And I think that goes back to Board Member Hansen's question about the right approach. If I may just add, sir, that I do believe if it would be in our best interest if the board could act on this today, with the caveat knowing that some of these things will be fleshed out further in the business cases that will come forward. And I know that we have a legislative board meeting, I believe, in a couple of weeks, but we will be called on as your staff in the next couple of weeks to have meetings with analysts and legislative leadership. The governor's office, I believe, will roll out their budget the next couple of days. And if we can at least get clear about our priorities as we engage in those conversations, it would be very helpful.
Okay. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, thank you. I'm having a little bit of a hard time balancing this out, especially with the more than $2 million we're getting from the federal government, which, yeah, it's for reopening schools, but I'm just reading their cover letter. It's to restore, maintain high quality learning environments and to take comprehensive action to mitigate the unprecedented learning losses. And it goes on a little bit further. So I'm seeing this as the same thing, and maybe I'm missing that. I guess what I'm saying is I'm wondering if the legislature is going to be like, well, aren't you getting federal monies to the tune of $2 million? I guess I'm trying to figure this out in my mind. And then when they look at what we've spent with ESSER 1, which some of the funding we've spent all the way, and other funding we're below 50%, and it was supposed to be spent, which they extended that out by December. So it's kind of hard, especially right now, to make a decision on something I'm not seeing the full details on. And I think we have time. Am I wrong in saying that? So I don't know if someone could address those concerns.
Deputy Superintendent Jones.
So let me try to answer Board Member Earl's questions, sir, or address the concern. Yes, yes, we have the CARES Act funding. If the board were to prioritize, with the caveat that the superintendent said, the use of what we have right now is a picture of the availability of one-time funds towards these purposes. What it does is it allows staff to engage with the legislative fiscal analysts, with the, to her point, to the superintendent's point, that to say, we need to arrive and balance this equation of what the CARES Act funding money means and what this request means as well, in the interest of our board's governance over public education, right? The risk is if you don't prioritize or request that this one-time money be used along this line or for these purposes, subject to further analytics and evaluation of the applicability of the CARES Act funding, and getting the input we will need, and we always support or address from the field itself. Then we can balance this equation. Then we can come back to you and say, and to the legislature and say, look, this is how the CARES Act funding falls in, and it's enough or it's not enough, or here's where the state funding can come in. Because again, right now there's $390 million that we're tracking of funds, of one-time funds in the education fund. So we also have, to our right, and our left, the higher ed and the, other agencies that will also want to make requests of this one-time funding. So by prioritizing this one-time funding at these levels, it doesn't mean that will always be set. It could change to more, it could change to less. But what it does is it does enable us to say that this is what the board would like, and it will be subject to further development and analytics that support, Board Member Earl's concern or her question about, look, there's all this other funding coming from CARES Act. Well, that's just developed within the last couple of days or weeks on that too. By prioritizing the one-time money that we have out there along this line, at this point, again, facilitates, I think, exactly what your questions, facilitates our ability to answer your questions, ma'am. So does that help at all?
Well, isn't this the same? We're making the same request as the CARES Act funding. I'm not seeing a huge difference there. There may be some slight scope in your schools, which we're doing. Some of our districts are still working on that. So that's where I'm having a hard time differentiating between the two. And that makes it harder because the one we are guaranteed to get the funding for, and the other we're having, anyways, I'm trying to balance that out is what I'm saying. So thank you.
Okay. And if
may I respond? One of the things and one of the challenges, as Scott mentioned, was this is developing so quickly. We're getting some of the guidance literally 2 days ago, and we're still parsing through the regulations, and we're still going to continue to receive regulations on the new funds. And so part of the thought process, once we found out about EAC, was we were thinking about CARES 1, which, and much of that funding was very restricted to virus mitigation, PPE, the sanitization of spaces, and very specific types of virus mitigation activities. Not saying that's the only thing that CARES has been used for, but that was a lot of what we were thinking of, where the state funds, contingent on the legislature approving the use of those funds, can be used more broadly to meet the academic needs of students. And so, but there's no intention I can at least say this: we don't want to utilize state funds for things that the CARES funding can be used for. We want to use the CARES funding and the stimulus dollars as effectively as possible, and then utilize state dollars in those other ways that may not be as available based on the regulations. But again, this is developing, all at the same time. We're building the airplane as it's flying. That's one of the reasons why it appears that there is more overlap than will be.
Thank you. So I have a question for Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones that might help for this a little bit. What's being proposed here, the way that I see this in the big picture, is with this new awareness of this funding, by acting on this, it gets us to the table. We want to get to the table and then sort out the CARES and those restrictions while we're talking to the legislature to create other opportunities. And those opportunities are not clearly defined yet, but will be defined, where we can come up with one-time money that can pay for extra teacher development days, maybe even extended calendar, days, the summer bridge programs. But it gets us at the table with the legislature to be able to work this. If we drag our feet on this, if I'm seeing this right, and we don't go to the table to start the discussions, then where will we be? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And so the water is not pushed to the end of the row. The deals are not done, but I see that we need to get to this gets us to the table. Am I seeing this wrong, Deputy Superintendent Jones?
No, sir. I couldn't summarize it any better, sir. Thank you.
So the details will be played out probably in the next few weeks several weeks as this plays out. But thank you. We have more questions or comments as staff. We have staff with their hand raised. Sarah Young.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. So just an additional piece of information that I'd share related to the existing funding streams, the new funding stream of ESSER 2, and then this opportunity for state funds. The messaging that we've heard from the field is that resources are definitely in need. And just because we are reflecting to you a percentage of reimbursement requests, honestly, much of that is based on a limited capacity in the business administrative offices to file the appropriate paperwork. So it's not that the funds haven't been spent and aren't being used. It's just a question of it takes time for them to get all of the documentation that we require to be able to process those reimbursements. So I just wanted to share that additional information to provide some context related to, there are a lot of needs in the field related to CARES, not just for the existing funding, the new federal funding, but also this opportunity for state funding that may not have been clear in my original presentation. thank you for being able to share that.
Board Member Hart.
Yeah, it does sound like a lot of money, and I understand that, but I just keep returning back to a 15% learning loss, comparing last year to this year across subjects and across demographics. That is a huge need. And now, in the field, we're starting to plan for next year, and we're staring down the reality of opening, with masks and still needing to mitigate, and address the virus. And we don't know when a vaccine is coming for school-age children. I do see a difference between COVID response and educational response due to the loss of learning. I also do hear, and I want to make sure that I'm hearing it correctly, that state funding could be used for such things as preparing teachers for having to teach in multiple modalities, and that may or may not be part of ESSER 2. Is that correct?
Sarah Young, do you want to answer that, or can you, or do you know what's in that?
I realize it's only been 2 days.
No, it's a great question. So I'm actually, if you'd be willing to repeat it, I want to make sure I answer the comprehensive question.
I see the opportunity for state funding to address more the learning loss and the preparation for continuing into the fall with multiple modalities of learning and the realities of COVID. And then the ESSER 2 money as more of a COVID response, PPE, air purification, things that we know are effective for responding to COVID. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to in the ESSER 2 whether learning loss mitigation is included in that, or is it more based on PPE and COVID response? Does that make sense?
It does, yes, thank you. So in terms of the new ESSER 2 funding, it's important to note that the federal guidelines really authorize any of the activities that are authorized under our current Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So similar to ESSER 1, that's a pretty broad opportunity for funding. However, to your point, Board Member Hart, we have seen that our LEAs have used their previous ESSER money towards those COVID mitigation components, such as air filtration, such as opportunities for PPE, additional cleaning and sanitization, and other kind of infrastructure related needs. I think that your articulation of how we could frame it as an agency related to federal dollars being used for those more infrastructure related needs, whereas the state dollars being used to mitigate learning losses would definitely be an approach that our current data about what we've spent on would back up.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Davis?
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I move that the board replace the business case titled Re-engaging Learners Who Are Disconnected for $5 million one time with the business case titled Immediate Response to Learning Losses Created by the COVID-19 Pandemic for $60 million one time. And I'd like to speak to the motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second. Board Member Straight.
Okay. Board Member Davis, you want to speak to the motion? Vice Chair Davis, sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. I really think I'm just trying to look for somewhat of a compromise to get moving in my head here, because it's difficult to move forward. And I'm sensing when I'm listening to board members, it's difficult to move forward on this right now because we can't see the business cases in detail. And so while we love what we're hearing from the presentations, it's hard to know how those exactly are going to flesh out in the actual business case. And then it's even more compounded because we don't get to necessarily really have a say on the business cases. So before you see it, it's hard to vote on it. However, we're in a really tight time frame right now, and we've got to get talking about some of these issues with the legislature. So at least for right now, until we get, and someone else can make another motion, but at least for right now, until we get some of the other things figured out with ESSER and what exactly the 200 million will look like, and reprioritizing, at least just for right now, I think we could replace the 5 million with the 60 million, understanding that it's probably going to look like what we've heard today, and just put that in the same spot with the understanding that we may come back in 2 weeks and reprioritize all of this and add more. But for right now, I think we need to at least make a move.
Someone's typing with their mic open.
That would not be me. Okay. Discussion to the motion. We have a motion on the table. Board Member Hart? Discussion, okay. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so the motion before the board is that the board replace the business case titled Re-engaging Learners Who Are Disconnected for 5 million one time with the business case titled Immediate Response to Learning Losses Created by the COVID-19 Pandemic for 60 million one time. That is the motion on the table and before the board. So board members on this, please vote. Let's try the green check again. Okay, board member Lear, I'm not seeing, are you a yay or an A?
I tried to do what you said. I voted green. Yes.
You're a yes?
Yes.
Vice Chair Belknap, I'm seeing this passes unanimously. Is that what you're seeing? Okay, Lear. Oh, no, Hymas, I didn't see yours. Board Member Hymas?
Yeah, sorry guys, it's there. I hit that green check like 4 times.
I'm sorry.
From here on out.
Is that what you're seeing?
Yep, and then everyone needs to remove their hands and checks.
Okay, please remove your checks and hands. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, and the checks are slowly coming off. Sometimes it's hard to get them on. Okay, thank you. The way this discussion's been going, I'm not seeing any other. Is there more to the presentation? I don't think there is, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. Is there any other motions? Board Member Davis, was your hand raised? Or Vice Chair Davis? I'm going to get that right.
It's just fine. Yes, please forgive me, but I've been trying to get answers on the $4 million for representatives. I need to make a motion. I move that we prioritize $4 million for the USIM LEA counterpart money and put it as the next one in our priority list. I believe it's number 7. I'm sorry for doing this on the fly. I'm just getting info that we need to have it on there.
Right, the typewriter's on again.
Yeah, I don't know where that typewriter's coming from, and it's definitely.
I think it's actually Board Member Davis's mic, and when you look at the list, when you speak, that little typing sound comes up, and it's the only mic on. So I apologize, Board Member Davis, but I think it might be something with your mic.
Okay, so the way that I'm seeing this motion is that the board prioritized 4 million USIMS, the 2020 HB 67 as board priority number 7. Is there a second?
Second, Belknap.
You want to speak to the motion, Vice Chair Davis?
Sure, I will. I just think this is something that we have to prioritize. Nobody else is going to ask for this. We've got USBA and some others asking for some of the things that we are also asking for, but this is the one that we specifically have asked for. We have schools that are struggling with reporting requirements, and once we get USIMS up and running, we think theoretically it's going to cut a lot of that reporting down, even by maybe 50%. Not only that, this will save money. So the licenses that are purchased with this $4 million will save money overall. And in time, it will not only pay for itself, but save money. And I think that Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones could speak to this as well. And I'm sorry that my microphone is doing that. I will try to figure it out. But I would love to hear from Deputy Superintendent Jones if he's willing to speak about this and why it's crucial that it gets funded this year.
Well, and we do have that justification from recall from the past when we were moving this forward. So Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, can you speak to the support and the justification that we had in the past on this?
Right. So very quickly, and Board Member Davis touched on this, is, we've identified concerns with systems in various LEAs, and in order to meet, the requirement of the USIMS bill, that we have that interoperability. This funding was intended, $4 million ongoing money, to provide the ability for us to provide LEAs the ability to configure their financial systems, upgrade them, purchase whole new systems to meet the requirements of interoperability with USIMS, but more so, along the lines of reporting. So even with like the school fees implementations, things like that, anytime changes like that occur, it's, they can impact the systems. And if you lack the systems, then you can't necessarily meet the requirements of the changes unless you have the systems or the resources, if you will, to do that. So, HB 67 was intended to provide resources to LEAs so that we could, in its financial systems specific, it's to increase the interoperability of the ability for USIMS, but then also to provide them with resources or up-to-date systems that can, really track and help meet the requirements of program accounting, dual entry accounting, all of those. So it's, there's a lot of justification, a lot of good reason why, we want to see this supported. If I may, Chair, I do need to clarify though. Yeah, okay. So somebody's typed in there, is this ongoing or one time? That's the only clarification I'd also like to see maybe could be made as part of the motion.
I don't think we're going to amend the motion. I'll restate it, make sure the maker of the motion and the second still good on it. But why don't I just state it right now, and then we'll go to more discussion to have this cleaned up. And the way I see this is that the board prioritized $4 million ongoing one time to fund the LEA Financial Information System Program that was in 2020 HB 67 as board priority number 7. Vice Chair Davis, is this your motion?
Yes, but you said ongoing and one time in the sentence. So which do we need it to be?
What do we need it to be? What do you want it?
Ongoing.
Ongoing.
Sorry.
Okay. So it's ongoing. Vice Chair Belknap, you're the second. Are you still good? I just don't want to amend all of this. Okay. Board Member Lear, question, comment, or
Yes, thank you. I'll say this much more simply than Scott did. Unless we have an accurate system that takes in the information, we can't possibly provide accurate data back to LEAs, back to the legislature, back to the federal government. And I worked with, as I'm recalling, that an update and upgrade of the Cactus system is part of this. Is that true, Scott? You can you can nod or shake your head.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Scott.
No, so no, this request in HB 67 was centric to financial information systems in the LEAs. USIMS is the docking station, if you will, or the mothership for financial systems, student information systems, and educator like Cactus system. I think that's what you're meaning, ma'am.
Right. Okay, I'll stick with the first part of my comment, that until we have a system that accurately takes in information, we can't simplify reporting effectively. And this is just something that's very necessary, as tight as money is. And that may be new information for new board members, but it's simply the financial system that needs to be accurate, or we waste a lot of time and we don't know how credible the results are. So I fully support this motion.
Okay, Member Norton.
I just wanted to add on to that statement that we heard Sarah Young say earlier today. The reason that we haven't seen this money being used is because the business administrators in some of these small districts, that's the superintendents, just are deluged in these reports. So I think anything that we can help them with to automate is good for everybody.
Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. The motion before the board is that the board prioritize $4 million ongoing to fund the LEA Financial Information Systems Program 2020 House Bill 67 as board priority number 7. Board members at this time, please vote. Board Member Lear, are you a yes? In favor? We're not seeing a hand, but a verbal would be nice. Board Member Lear?
I'm sorry, yes, I've got my thumb up. That's what that means. I can't get my...
It still won't jump up, so I'll still ask it, but thank you for responding. The voting is complete, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So it's clear we still have some hands up. Board Member Belknap, your hand's raised. Or Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, please.
Okay.
If I can get this right, it will be really wonderful. I would like to make a motion that we move forward the 200K and that it be retitled as to be used for students to become proficient, which gives us a broad swath for now.
Can you restate that again? I apologize. I was just trying to see where.
You want me to do it again?
So proactive measures to?
No, 200K to be used for students to become proficient. And that could be COVID, that could be anything, that could really give a lot of control. Oh, sorry.
Vice Chair Belknap, did you mean 200 million?
200 million.
Yeah.
And then I apologize, please state it one more time.
To be used to support students becoming proficient. It's very broad.
So it's one time.
And Board Member Belknap, did you have a preference on the priority or just after the last one?
Sure, after the last one.
So it would be 8?
Great.
Okay. There's a Vice Chair Belknap made the motion that the board prioritize $200 million one time to fiscal year 22 to be used to support students become proficient as board priority number 8. Is there a second to that motion?
Second, Board Member Straight.
Okay, want to speak to the motion, Vice Chair Belknap?
I do, and I'm sorry I spoke right on top of that. I think this gives us a really broad swath that over the next couple of weeks that or the next few weeks that the superintendency can come back with more in-depth information on what they're thinking about for a business case. And if not, at least it puts us at the table again for the 200 million and gives a lot of control to the local districts how we set this up.
Okay. Discussion to the motion. Member Straight?
Yes, thank you. Just a reminder that in my view, and I wish I had something to back this up as far as data, but from my experience, the equity gap has grown greater as a result of COVID. And I think this motion would be effective in addressing some of those needs.
Okay. Member Earl, your hand's raised.
Yeah, once again, I'm trying to balance this out. And I appreciate this wording because I think this is more along the lines of the direction we want to head, especially for local control. I think maybe it's the amount we're getting from the federal government I'm having a hard time weighing out, but maybe there's more to this than I'm fully seeing. And I know that we'll have 3 or 4 more votes as we move forward. And so anyways, I'm just trying to, like I said, balance this all out and see where we can head.
Okay, Board Member Belknap, your hand's still raised.
No, I did have. I just think if the second would be okay if we change that and put student proficiency supports.
Okay.
Does that feel okay?
Yes, I really like the word proficient. I think it's very broad and useful.
Chair, are you okay with that?
Well, I'm not seeing a whole lot of difference between the two, but I see a little bit here. But so the motion would be that the board prioritize 200 million one time for fiscal year 22 for student proficiency support as board priority number 8. The maker of the motion's good. The second's good. So is there any other discussion to this motion? I just want to speak to it. I appreciate the board's willingness to just to aggressively get to the table so we can flush this out. I think really good things are going to come forward. We work with our LEAs. You know, we talk about superintendents and districts, but we have a lot of charter schools there that this is definitely going to benefit as we're moving forward into this. So I appreciate, and I usually don't speak very much, but I am excited about the opportunities if this motion goes through with the other motion and the good work that can happen here in the future. So I'm not seeing any other hands, so we're going to call this for a vote. Again, I'll restate the motion, then we'll vote. The board prioritize 200 million one time for fiscal year 22 for student proficiency support as board priority number 8. Board members at this time, please vote. Board Member Lear, I know I'm most likely I'm not going to be able to see your hand or your thumb or whatever, but can you tell me how?
Yes, I'm going to try the heart next time. If you see a heart, that also means yes.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member, oh, there we go. The voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. If you've got now, we'll clear the board. We're clearing the checks. Board Member Cannon, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a comment or question or? No? Okay. Board Member Davis, you still have a check on? Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands at this time. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, or I think you might be next. Oh, I see a hand up. Board Member Earl.
So are we moving on from business cases, or is this just prioritization? Or could it be a question about business cases?
Well, we were in funding priorities, and people can ask questions on business cases, but if somebody wants to move a case forward, this would be a time to make a motion. If there isn't any motions at this time, there can be later and other meetings.
I don't want to move a case forward. I want some more clarity specifically spelled out. And it doesn't need to be during this meeting, but in future meetings, spelled out on one of the business cases.
So what would be good
Can I make that request?
Well, you can submit that request to leadership or whatever, and we can get you all answers.
All right, I'll do that.
As we evolve. Okay.
I'll do that. Thank you.
But right now we don't have any on the table. So, I almost said it again. Sorry there. Board Member Moss. I see that Moss, and I just automatically put that rep in front. I'll have to discipline myself. Board Member Moss, your hand is raised.
Thank you. Just quick point of clarification. The first time for me going through this, my understanding is that those business cases that are on the list would go through unless removed. Is that the case? You know, we need a motion to bring them higher up, but otherwise, if somebody brings a motion, then those sort of go through and into that conversation as you described.
So that, will you restate your question? We have our priority, we have a list, and then we have our priority. And so all of that's just staying how it is until we choose to move it or delete or.
Understood. I guess my question on procedure, the standard procedure here would be, as I understand it, some members will bring a motion to bring something from the list up into the priority list. Others will have questions about them. And then at some point, there's a motion to just submit the list with those that are prioritized and those that are not. And those all go into that conversation in future board meetings and then at approach. Is that the correct?
You are correct.
Do they don't have to be individually moved, in other words, to put them forward on that list that goes through for consideration in the legislative process?
But eventually they will, as we get to the end, as we are moving into the session.
Right, not today.
Flush this out, but yeah, today's not our last day to put the water to the end of the road. Does that answer your question, Board Member Moss?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Can I offer some input there too, just real quick? So keep in mind too that there may be some legislation that's opened up that addresses these same business cases or requests as well. So that's why it's an iterative parallel process going into the session. Does that help, Board Member Moss? You know, you might see other legislation that, does address, these business cases that have been brought forward. So there's always that aspect too. So does that help or confuse it more?
No, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Superintendent Dixon, your hand is raised.
Yes, I'll just add a little, I don't know if it's thunder to Deputy Jones lightning or lightning to his thunder, but just a reminder that the process for today is at the request of the legislature, meaning heads of the appropriations committees, fiscal analysts, and the governor's office, for us to get 5 or 6 things popped out as the board's priorities. And then all those business cases, while they do move forward to Scott's point, we will continue to have those discussions in addition to funding of bills that may be put forward by legislators. So today's purpose and the urgency around that is that we have been asked to put 5 or 6 things forward. That is not always the case. From year to year, we get different directions from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, but that's the direction this year.
And it seems to be subject to change because the direction's been changing from November to present. So that's why it's good that we have our frequent board meetings through the legislative session so that we can react and adjust ourselves and move things around. Board Member Klein, your hand is raised.
Yes, so just a point of clarification, those items on all the business cases, if it's not a priority to the board, is that something that can be removed altogether?
Well, we haven't removed. There are little placeholders down, and then they carry from year to year, but they're inventoried and placed. But what really becomes relevant is what we move up on our priority list. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And this is part of an evolution. We started this, wasn't it, Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones? Maybe it just seems like a couple of years ago, but maybe we've been doing it about 4 years. And it seems to be a good process that has helped move good funding forward for public education. So there's some evolution here, and as we're moving forward with this kind of business case and some justification. So it is kind of fluid, but what really matters is what actions we take on our priorities. And there'll be a time at the very end where they'll say, okay, let's hear from the board. What do you want on the WPU? But we have that kind of behind us. But there'll only be so much in the pot, and they could ask us for those priorities and ask us to adjust our funding request too. So this is a year of first again, and I'm sure it will be an interesting adventure as we go through the funding scenarios this year. Board Member Booth, your hand is raised.
Yes, Chair Huntsman, I just wanted to insert a little comment as a new board member. I'm kind of amazed at the level of commitment, particularly on the part of Superintendent Dixon and her staff. We'll spend several hours or a few days preparing for a meeting, and preparing for this meeting, I have to say, was a little overwhelming as I began to read document after document, and recognizing how staff are not just spending a few hours or a few days, but they're living it week in and week out, month after month. I just express appreciation for keeping track of so many complex issues and making adjustments to the information as they go along, communicating to us so that we can stay on top of what would be an insurmountable mountain of information. And as we continue to focus on what's important for children in our state, I am recognizing as I'm sitting in this meeting how indebted we are to the staff who are making sense of so much information that it's almost a tsunami of information that must be considered. Grateful for this great board who are asking such thoughtful questions. I'm just feeling grateful to be a part of this operation, this adventure that we're having together. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Board Member. That the one thing that I've realized over the last few years is with the staff that we have here, we don't kick the can down the road. As things come before us, we get it before the board ASAP and try to inform the board as best we can to make informed decisions. And so that's the commitment that I see from our witness from our staff. And that's sometimes it's difficult, but these are difficult times. So appreciate the board's patience as information comes to you. So thank you. Member Klein, did you have another question? Your hand's raised. Sorry, I didn't see it come down, but I see that it's back in. Okay, notes down. Okay, Vice Chair Davis.
Oh, I just found my answer. I'll take my hand down. I just found my answer in the great documentation that staff provided for us. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think at this time we're going to move to Deputy Superintendent Stallings. Are you prepared for our statutory changes?
I am, Chair.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon again, board members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. We'll now be discussing not the money, but the law or the policy changes that staff are proposing to you to support or get a green light from you for us to work with legislators to open bill files. And for new board members, if you've never seen this document before, we're only going to be discussing 3 new proposals today, but I just wanted to bring to your attention that there's approximately, I believe, 18 others here on the list. So you can look at the policy requests that have been approved by the board in previous meetings. And what that means is these are short descriptions of the bill that then we would work with legislators to open the bill files, and then we would work on the details of the bill. But then the bill will be able to come back to you again once it is drafted for your review and recommendations. So I'll go ahead and go forward with the 3 that we have today. First is a recommendation from staff, and this is something we've also worked on with USDB, Superintendent Coleman and staff, to amend the teacher salary supplement program to add deaf education licensed educators to also be available or eligible to receive the supplement. Currently, deaf educators who have a deaf education endorsement qualify for TSSP, but deaf educators who have a deaf educator license do not. So there's a difference. And so this change would likely mean approximately 7 educators would now qualify that don't currently qualify for the supplement. The second one, and I'll just go through all 3 unless Chair Huntsman, you ask me to stop. Number 2 would be to modify the statute for driver education classes to change the reference from school districts to LEAs, and this would allow the USDB to also offer driver education and be eligible for funding as outlined in statute. Currently, USDB does not receive funding through that program. And then the last request is a request to add statutory language that would require the Office of the State Auditor to provide an audit of the minimum school program periodically. And this would allow the State Auditor's Office to direct bill our office for the costs of doing that audit. And I'd be happy to answer any questions related to these 3 requests, as well as other staff who are available. And just as a reminder, there is more detail on each of these requests in the backup to Civic Clerk if you have, if you want to look at any additional detail.
Okay, Vice Chair Belknap.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we move these priorities, these legislative statutorial changes, 1, 2, 3, 4, thank you. General, Angie, okay, 2021 general session requests for statutory changes 1, 2, and 3. I move that we move them forward.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second.
Okay. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing Board Member Earl.
Yes, just wondering if, and I know you gave a brief overview, is there an overview, a little bit more detail on number 3? Or is that included in our?
It is included. So if you look here on this MSP review, and Board Member Earl, no need to apologize. We actually got this uploaded late yesterday. I think this has recently come to the attention of our staff, so apologize. This last number 3 request was added late. So if you look here, you can see more detail.
Okay, I can look over that. I'm sorry, I did go through those. That's why that one did not sound familiar. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, we have a motion before the board, and that is, where did it go? Oh, under 2021 general session request for statutory changes to include items 1, 2, and 3 as outlined. Not seeing any other discussion. Oh, Board Member Lear.
Thanks. Sorry, late to the party. I'm wondering, Angie, if you know if the state auditor's office similarly bills other agencies for auditing them or
That is a
reviewing them.
question I do not know, but I would guess that either Deputy Jones or Director Debbie Davis might know.
Deputy Superintendent Jones, can you answer the question?
The answer is yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll restate the motion again. I've not seen any discussion or hands raised. The motion before the board is that under the 2021 general session request for statutory changes, that under legislative proposals for board considerations to move forward with 1, 2, and 3 as shown. All those in favor, please vote.
I vote aye.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Thank you. The voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, I think that completes your section.
It does. Thank you.
I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but I want to make sure we have a periodic break here and there. At this, it's 3:11. Let's be back in here at 3:20. I will take a quick break.